Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric here with Iraq Veteran 8888. We're out here outside of Fort Worth, Texas at the 4th annual Texas Airgun Show. And guys, this has been a really awesome day. We're going to be looking at a ton of random stuff, but I wanted to pull over here the legend himself. I've got a special guest here in this video. This is Tom Gaylord. He is the Godfather of Airguns. Guys, I'm telling you, this guy is a walking encyclopedia of airgun knowledge, and very, very interesting individual, fun to talk to, and he's agreed to have a little chat here, and I'm going to ask him some questions. Instead of me trying to, you know, act like I know what I'm talking about with a lot of this airgun technology, why don't we just let the man himself, you know, say what needs to be said here. And I tell you, when it comes to airgun technology, you know, we're a little bit new to some of it. So it's one of those things where we've got to shoot some really cool stuff. Like my first exposure to air rifles, Tom, was the Air Force Texan.
Yes.
Okay, and, you know, big bore, lots of power, good foot pounds and everything, but it didn't really start that way. I mean, air guns started out a lot more simple, a lot less power.
Well, let's go all the way back.
Yeah.
Let's go back to 1550.
Shall we?
They started out as big bores.
They did.
Yes, sir. They started out as big bores, and they were big bores until about, I'm going to say 1870s-ish, you know? And by the way, you say I know all these things, and I do know a lot, but anything I don't know, I'm just going to lie to you, and I don't think you'll know the difference.
Oh, that's fine. Well, that makes this really easy then.
It does, yeah. No editing necessary.
Yeah.
But anyhow, no, they did start out as big bores. They were smooth bore for the most part. They started rifling them maybe in the 19th century. But your Air Force Texan, yeah, that's a later development, you might say. Big bores in the modern era, which started, when did the modern era start? In the 90s, 1990s.
So we're talking PCP, basically.
Well, we're talking big bore PCPs, because PCPs actually started in the year 1980. The Daystate Company in the UK came out with a capture gun that you could shoot tranquilizer darts with. And somebody looked at that and said, man, that would make a great air gun. Why don't we put a .22 caliber barrel on it? They did, and they came out with the Daystate Huntsman. So 1980 is your year for PCPs.
That's right. But
the 90s is when big bores started. And Dennis Quackenbush is really the guy that got it started in around 95, 96-ish. Mm-hmm. With, he makes guns. I mean, you could call them production guns. He makes a couple of hundred a year. And for a long time, Dennis was the only game in town. And then along came the Koreans, and they saw that he was doing well, and they began to make big bores. And then it started proliferating a little bit. Now, Air Force Airguns didn't start with big bores. They started with small bores.
Right.
And just for the viewers, small bores are 177, 20, 22, and 25. Anything above 25 constitutes a big bore. And there are some 25s now shooting rifle bullets. I'm talking about jacketed Spitzer slugs that are actually big bores in 25 caliber.
Just because of the amount of power they make,
because
or
the
just
amount
the
of
type
power.
of bullet you can use?
They're shooting these things at 300 yards.
Yeah, that's
They're taking game at 100 yards with these things.
Yeah, no doubt.
So Air Force started with small bores, but they were very powerful. And one of the neat things, and John won't tell you, that John McCaslin, the owner of Air Force Airguns, won't tell you this because he always forgets, but he invented the shroud. Everybody thinks the shroud is this way cool thing, must have been invented in Europe. No, John McCaslin in 2001 came out with his Air Force Talon SS. SS stands for sound suppressed, and all it is a barrel inside a hollow aluminum tube with a muzzle cap, and that muzzle cap strips off some of the air and it keeps the explosion from the release of air inside the hollow aluminum tube. So he invented the shroud, and as quick as he did, well, everybody else saw what he was doing, and they followed
suit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until, what, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago that John came out with his Texan. It was the first big bore that he made.
Yep.
But oh my gosh, what a gun.
Well, one thing that they don't play around with, you know, they certainly do, you know, really research and do their homework before they release a gun.
Their development is second to none. They spend years.
We were able to go over to the factory and we looked around the other day. Really? It was pretty cool.
So you saw all the stuff they do. And they'll go through prototype after prototype. shooting for not just accuracy, not just power, but they're looking for reliability. They're looking for triggers that people won't complain about. They're looking for so many things. And you know, their guns are so adjustable. You can adjust the power, you can adjust the air that they fill with, that people get into this kick of they buy an Air Force gun and then they start redesigning it themselves because it's so flexible, and they start sending them emails about what they didn't do, you know, what you guys ought to do. And of course, they did all that in their prototyping. So it's quite a company.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about vintage air rifles, because I know here in the show we've been walking around, we see some like vintage Daisies and some Benjamins and Crossmans, and like a lot of these names that are really familiar, like, you know, anybody that hasn't been living under a rock that's even walked through an aisle at Walmart knows Benjamin or Crossman or Daisy, or they hear of Red Riders and things. So what's your take on like vintage guns? Like, what should someone look for if they're looking to buy a vintage piece or acquire it or get into air gun collecting? Like, is that a thing? Like, do people collect a lot of air guns?
Yeah, it really is. And in fact, this show is more about that than it is about new guns.
Sure.
And you'll find a lot of vintage guns in there, in the show. I probably have more of them at my table than anybody.
Yep.
And that's because I like them. You ask, what is it about it? These guns that were made, and I said air guns go back to the 1500s. Well, when we're talking about vintage air guns, we're really talking about guns that were made maybe in the 20th century, maybe up till about 1980. Guns that are no longer made, but they were great guns, especially the ones that were made after World War I and up to, let's say, the 1960s. These guns are made with wood and steel. They're made in the old ways. You're a collector of military firearms.
Oh, yes.
These air guns, many of them are made just like firearms. There are Webley air guns you can't tell from a firearm.
That's right.
They're heavy, they're solid steel, they're blued steel.
Well, they're made by the same people in a lot of
They're
cases.
made by
Like,
the
so
same
Webley,
people,
you know, that made revolvers and things like that.
Yes.
They also made air guns.
Yes, and in, pardon me, in the United Kingdom, they didn't see a difference.
Right.
Their laws are different than our laws. Firearms not quite as easily accessible, so air guns were what they had. And they did it right.
That's awesome.
And that's what I like about, you can't call them antique air guns, but I'll call them vintage air guns.
I guess in the world of air guns they would be, certainly, though.
Yeah.
You know, I guess antique-ish in that world, especially considering that a lot of them you can still take out and shoot and enjoy them. It's not like they're not functional. I mean, they can be kind of serviced and rebuilt a little bit and made to, you know, function if they need, like, what, new seals or lubrication.
I just did an article for Firearms News, how long will it last? These vintage air guns have no end of life. There are Daisies the Army shot in their quick kill program 20 million times. They were rebuildable. So if they needed a spring, they put in a spring. If they needed a seal, they put in a seal.
Sure.
And the vice president of Daisy said, I think we made them too good.
You made them too good. You need to sell some more, but you can't.
You know, and that's another thing about this air gun show. Now, this show, not so much, but I've been to other shows where you'll see an old BB gun, and it's maybe 100 years old, and there'll be a price of $8,000 on it.
Wow.
I saw 3 BB guns I'm talking about, not pellet guns, sell for $41,000 cash 15 years ago in an aisle in front of a guy's table that had them. 2 guys wanted them, and they just started bidding, and they had a bidding war, and $41,000 changed hands.
Wow.
So it's not like the people who come to these shows are here because these things are cheaper. They're here because they like them.
So fast forwarding a little bit past, you know, some of the vintage pieces, which honestly, I will say that when I walked into this show, I saw that one booth right there in the corner, and I'm like, wow, these guns are awesome. And then sure enough, it's Tom's booth. So of course, you know, you've got the stuff that I think, yeah, I'm the same way. I like the wood and metal and old world craftsmanship. Like, to me, that's just so neat. And especially when a lot of these guns are made by gun companies, which is really awesome. And I love the whole military trainer thing. Like, you look at, you know, a Hakim service rifle that's made in Egypt, and then you look at a Hakim trainer.
I know.
Or you look at a K31, and then you look at like the BB gun inserts for the K31s. So something that kind of blends, you know, the rifles to the trainers is something I've always been a big fan of. And I'm admittedly a bit of a I'm a bit of a sucker for military training rifles. So, 22s and rimfires.
Sure.
But then there's also air rifles that go into the military trainer realm as well.
You need to get John pinned down, because he's got he's got a huge collection of full auto aerial airgun trainers.
Nice.
I suppose you know about that. I don't
seen
know.
them.
Have you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty cool. So
Yeah.
you guys will see a few shots of those guns of John's that he's talking about. So fast forwarding a little bit past the collectibles, as much
Yep.
as I love vintage military and
Sure.
collectibles, now in the modern airgun world, like, what are some of the cool innovations that you've seen? I mean, now technology, I guess, is what we're really discussing.
Okay.
So, pumping a gun or pumping up a gun or filling it, a pre-charged pneumatic PCP, you said was developed around like the early 80s, 1980. But it wasn't always PCP. So how did the technology develop? Like, what were some of the big milestones in airgun technology?
All right. One of the biggest milestones in airgun technology happened in the 1970s. The Fine Work Bow Company, and we shorten that to FWB because nobody can spell Fine Work Bow, came out with a sport rifle. In other words, not a target rifle. They're known for making target rifles. They called it their Model 120. Well, what they didn't fully appreciate was they put a long piston stroke in it, and it made a rifle that was so easy to cock, and yet it had so much power that it achieved over 800 feet per second. And that was the holy grail in the 1970 time frame. They upgraded that to the Fine Work Bow Model 124, and the horsepower wars were on, and they're still on today. You'll see air guns now advertised at 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, even 1,600 feet per second. And I'm talking about spring piston air guns.
Yeah, that's no joke.
When Air Force came out with the Condor in 2004, I tested the first 100 that went out the door. We had to shoot a 22 caliber pellet at 1,250 feet per second or more, and we checked off 100 of them by serial number to assure ourselves that all of those did when we shipped it. Now that gun does that. Nowadays, that's not so surprising, but back then, nobody had ever heard of it. We were going supersonic with a 22 caliber pellet.
Yeah,
that
so
was
you're
a
talking,
big deal.
You're talking a gun that's not a gun, really, because you're talking 22 long, exceeding in some cases 22 long rifle performance.
Yes, and then you fast forward again to the Escape that was developed between Air Force and something that Ton Jones wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And now the Escape develops 100 foot-pounds in 22. Now that is right at what a 22 long rifle standard speed cartridge will develop.
Sure.
1 to 120 is about where they are. What's the difference? The only difference is that we're shooting pellets. We call them Diablo. That's not Diablo, but Diabolo. Extra syllable, very important there. Diabolo is European juggling device. It's a thing you do on a string, and clowns do it all the time, throwing them up and down, and you can.
I'd like to see you demonstrate that, but
I actually have one, but I didn't bring it.
That's right.
Anyhow, the Diabolo pellet is the wasp-waisted, hollow-tailed pellet, and it has characteristics that slow it down. It has high drag, basically. It slows down faster, which is good. It's like a badminton birdie, if you will. You
Sure.
can hit that thing and
it
can
looks
take off
exactly
fast.
like that.
It does, but it slows down fast. So you get range safety. So your Escape with 100 foot-pounds is not as long range dangerous as a 22 long rifle would be.
Sure.
At the same 100 foot-pounds.
Absolutely.
So there's another advantage, another milestone. Today, the milestones, there's so many of them.
Sure.
They want quieter guns. They want better triggers. They want spring guns that cock easier but develop more power. We're getting to where the physics just don't support it anymore, but
Yeah.
these guys,
There's only so many ways to reinvent that wheel.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
And it's funny, talking about numbers, this is an important conversation, is the numbers game. There's always talking about every company trying to get that extra like 100 feet per second or that extra 30 or 40 foot-pounds of energy, or it's all about manipulating those numbers and try to make the numbers make more sense. And people look at performance based on numbers that are published and not on what the gun's actually doing. Do you think that it's a common trait that, you know, are air gunners so serious that they're going to go out and do all the homework, or are they trying to appeal to the guy who's just going to go to Walmart and go, all right, higher number, that's what I want?
What you have now is a dichotomy. The guy who goes to Walmart is not going to buy the gun that takes research to find.
Sure.
But
or costs $1,000.
The guy, well, that's right. Or the guy who does the research, now he's going to look at everything, but he doesn't know everything. For example, we have hand pumps to fill these pre-charged pneumatics.
Sure.
But they fill to 3,000 PSI and it's really hard. I weigh 220 pounds and I can, you know, it's hard for me to get down the pump down on the last few strokes.
Sure.
So in 2006, I took to the Crossman Corporation the idea for a gun that fills to 2,000 pounds, but goes just as fast.
Sure.
They couldn't believe it was possible. Well, a year later, they came out with the Benjamin Discovery. Now, several companies have figured out you can do that. You can get more with less. And in fact, going back to the Air Force Texan, they're developing with 3,000 PSI what other companies are having to go to 4,500 PSI, which drains every air supply you have.
Sure.
It's just impossible to keep up with the air.
Absolutely.
But at 3,000, it's a bike cruise because everybody sells 3,000.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that numbers game is really one of those things that gets kind of pushed around a lot when it comes to power levels and things like that. And it's important for people to do their own research. And one thing I've found with the airgun community is they are a bunch of people that are very nerdy when it comes to their data and getting everything. and you have to have good, solid data. And the man behind the camera over there, Chad, he's real big on collecting data and really fact checking when it comes to, you know, what published data is and how it kind of coincides with what you're dealing with. And we like playing around with a bunch of weird bullet designs. You know, I'll take bullets and spin them in my lathe and hollow them out and do little weird things to them. So air gun people, to me, they seem like they like to tinker a lot.
They love to tinker.
Yeah.
And they can get away with it because their guns don't carry as far. And that's another thing. The big deal in air guns today is hunting.
Sure.
It's the new field that's opened up. Now, hunting is not new, but hunting with an air gun is relatively new. And I'm not talking about rabbits and squirrels. We've been doing that for a long time. I'm talking about white-tailed deer. I'm talking about elk. I'm talking about wapiti. I'm talking about bison.
And you think it's a new challenge level is the big part of it? People want a challenge?
It's a challenge, but what's happened is we air gunners have crossed over a threshold of knowledge. We suddenly got into an area we didn't understand. We're doing what was done in the 1850s with a black powder rifle firing a lead ball.
36 caliber squirrel guns. And,
exactly.
Yep.
And the deer doesn't drop when he's hit. He has to bleed out. Any archer knows that. But air gunners don't know that. And suddenly you get an attack of sportsmanship when you shoot a deer and you have to watch that deer slowly expire. It's a completely different experience. It's not an inhumane experience because people have been doing that for thousands of years.
Right.
But ever since we've had high velocity center fire rifles, the deer has just fallen over from energy.
It's like people have come to expect an unrealistic performance expectation.
Exactly, yes.
Right.
Yes. So we're going back, and air gunners have crossed the threshold, and now we're having to learn things like bullet diameter and what weight does for you. Weight does so much for you. I'm talking about weight of projectiles. Does so much for you, and they want flat shooting guns, but that's not where it's at, folks.
Yeah, you're not going to get a laser beam flat air gun like that.
An arc, we've got guys shooting 1,100 feet. Is that right? 1,100 yards. Excuse me, 1,100 yards. With an air gun, with a big bore air gun. Now the big deal these days is shooting a group at 100 yards, because that's really hard to do with an air gun. And people want to shoot a 1-inch group. It just sounds right, you know. Well, I've never done it.
Easier said than done.
I've done it with an Air Force, one Air Force gun. It was a Condor SS. I shot a 1-inch 10-shot group at 100 yards. It's the only one I've ever shot.
I know those Texans are accurate.
I shot
really like 'em.
6 into 1.5 inches at 100 yards, 6 shots.
I think they got the perfect like formula there.
I think they do.
You know, with a 45 caliber air rifle, you know, PCP, and I know the PCPs, I guess, are inherently more expensive to manufacture, right? So if someone's wanting to get into PCP, those are definitely going to cost more, right?
Let's talk about that for a moment. Why would something that's just a hollow tube holding air cost more than something that has a mechanism that pushes a piston that generates force?
Yeah.
The reason is you have to seal that hollow tube so that it doesn't leak air. And that requires extremely precise machining. And you don't do it once. You're not standing at a lathe doing it until it's right. You do it time after time after time after time on a CNC machine. So you've got hundreds of products coming out in an 8-hour shift.
Yeah.
That is why your PCP costs more.
Sure.
It's the amount of detail you have to put into the manufacturing process.
So, talking about PCPs, I know we've talked a bit about vintage air guns. We talked about some of the milestones of air gunning and everything like that, and some of the cool technology. So, fast forward to right now today.
Yep.
What's your favorite type of air rifle now? Like, if you had to go now, other than a Quackenbush or other than a custom or something cool like that, if you had to go with like just a standard, let's just say mass-produced air rifle, like what's your favorite type of air rifle, or what do you think's the coolest one now these days?
Well, if you look at me, I'm not fresh and new. My favorite is a vintage gun. It's a Diana Model 27 break barrel spring piston rifle. Why? Because it's light, it's easy to cock, it's reasonably accurate, it's not deadly accurate, and it has this gorgeous ball-bearing trigger that you can set to a razor's edge and has a delightful release.
Really fun to shoot.
I love that gun.
Absolutely.
What's my next favorite? I hate to sound like an Air Force commercial, but it's a Talon SS.
The Talon.
My Talon SS at 50 yards, I can put 10 shots into 7/10 of an inch. Time after time after time. I've done it so many times.
Sure.
I just know what that gun's going to do. It's almost boring. It's so easy to shoot that well.
Are you familiar with the FX Impact? Have you seen that gun?
I've seen it. I've seen it. I've not shot it.
You haven't shot it?
But I'll tell you this, FX makes wonderful air guns.
Are you familiar with the way that thing works with
the smooth twist barrel?
Yeah. What do you think about that in an air gun?
I've heard good things and I've heard bad things. There's been a lot of talk about the smooth twist barrel.
Yeah.
And in fact, they've changed the process recently to how they make it, which leads you to wonder, were they making it as well as they could have before? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is the smooth twist barrel is accurate. I've seen too many results for it to not be accurate. But it may have characteristics I haven't tested that differ from a standard rifled barrel.
I know one thing, we've done some testing with them and they're pretty accurate, and that system I believe is something that a lot of folks don't really know about in the gun world, is that smooth twist thing. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but on a smooth twist, basically what happens is you have a section of barrel that's smooth, and then the bullet just travels down the barrel and then hits a section of rifling and just kind of imparts a little lofting effect to the bullet. So you basically, I guess what you're really achieving is less drag. So you should in theory get some really good velocities for what you're dealing with versus a certain length of barrel where you're getting almost more drag, slowing the bullet down.
I would correct the use of the word bullet, but you're a firearm guy and that's completely understandable. It's a pellet. And the point of the smooth twist, as Eric says, is you do get higher velocity with less air, which you can go one of two ways. You can get more shots or you can get higher velocity. And I think they've chosen to go with a larger number of shots at a given velocity because they know that's the accurate velocity. And it gives them all the accuracy they need, so why not?
Sure. And, you know, it's an economy thing. So you're saving air, you're getting more shots per fill.
Yes.
And I don't know if a gun like the FX Impact, for instance, would be used for hunting so much as it would just say target use, but that type of technology is really neat to me. That seems like a nice innovation to kind of add a little bit to what you mentioned, just my observations.
Sure.
That's a very interesting innovation in the airgun world.
Yep.
Where do you think air guns are going? I guess that's how we'll end today's video here. I mean, we've had a wonderful time at the show and just looking at all kinds of neat stuff. And I know that you've really seen a lot of things come and go. You've seen fads come and go. You've seen things in the technology level of air guns that have a lot of staying power. and things that are definitely going to be here for a long time to come. But what's on the way? What do you think the future of air guns hold for technology?
Well, I'm going to answer the question a little different than what you asked. The future of air guns is the future of shooting. The future of shooting, we already have in this country, I don't know how many tens of millions of firearms owners, but I think it's huge. It's 40, no, it's more than that. It's 70 or 80 million households have at least one gun. But that's not how many that's not how many firearms shooters we have in this country. So let's go down to the ones that are active firearm shooters. What do we got there? Maybe 5 to 10 million, something like that? These are guys that go to the range, or they go hunting, or they do both. Okay. When I started, and I started in the 1990s, we had maybe 10,000 air gunners. Serious guys that shot their gun and knew that they were shooting an air gun, not a
They were
firearm.
going out of their way
Exactly.
to
do
partake of the air gun world.
Today we've got over 100,000 in the United States, and what's happening is the firearms guys are learning that the air gun technology is not what they thought it was. And the air gun technology is changing so rapidly that once you find out what it can do, you just kind of want to stay on board to not miss the rest of the ride.
That's right.
And so I see air guns exploding for many reasons.
Not blowing up.
They're Thank you.
Oh, you had to clarify that.
I hadn't even thought about that. No, I see them exploding in use because firearm shooters are going to use them more. They're easier to use. They're quieter. They don't have the same distance range as a firearm. Sure. Ricochets are also less of a problem. Not a no problem, but they're less of a problem. So all of those things make air guns not a replacement for firearms, but an augmentation of your firearms. I still go to the range. I'm a hand loader. I cast bullets. I shoot black powder. I love firearms. Sure. But I shoot about 15 times more with air guns than I do with firearms, just because of the things you have to do to shoot firearms.
I think there is an accessibility to it that makes it very practical for people. And also, if I could go maybe just slightly down this rabbit hole a bit, I think that it also provides a lot less fuel for some of the folks on the anti-gun debate. So, a lot of folks, they point their finger at guns and they make a big deal about this or that. But I think it provides a medium in which people that might be maybe not on our side with guns might go, oh, well, maybe I can get my kids started on air gun because it's not a gun, wink, wink, in their mind, it's not a firearm.
I'd like to address
So it's
that.
harmless, but then the kid goes, oh, wow, this is neat. And then it's a kind of a gateway to the firearms world for them.
Whenever I'm asked by man or woman, why do you shoot air guns? I ask them, have you ever thrown darts? And most of them have. I say, why do you throw darts? Because you want to see if you can hit the target.
Sure.
That's why I shoot air guns, folks. I can hunt. I can do other things with air guns, but I like to see if I can hit the target. And I don't need a firearm to do that. I don't want to take my firearms away because I love them, but my air guns are so much more accessible to do the same thing I love doing.
And in a wide variety of different places too. You can do it in your backyard. Some people may not have access to a 100-yard range in their backyard.
I shoot in my house. I
Right.
shoot from my bedroom through my living room into my garage. I've shot my couch once.
Nice.
With an inaccurate air gun.
I wouldn't go telling a lot of people that, but that's funny.
Well, I did.
Nothing wrong with that. So, but yeah, the accessibility I think is very, very important to it, and making it, it's awesome that young folks can train on air guns and get exposed to air rifles at, a young age and really learn and hone their skills, and then move on to, actual firearms in time as well.
Sure.
So I think that's pretty important. I know we could talk all day about this subject, but I really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule here to talk to us today. And I figured out of all the people here at this Airgun Show today, Tom's the man, okay? He knows a lot. He's forgotten more than I'll ever know about air guns. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today and to kind of address my YouTube audience and everything. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And Tom, thank you very much for your time.
Pleased to do it, Eric.
Anything you want to say?
Air guns, give them a try.
Air guns, give them a try. How about go throw some darts? All right, well, guys, thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time. Tom, have a good day. Thanks for your time. We'll see you guys soon.